Welcome to the School Leadership Show. I'm Mike Dowdy. This is the only podcast dedicated to helping practicing and aspiring school leaders realize their potential, advance their careers, and achieve work-life balance. We bring together the greatest minds from inside and outside of education to deliver you the insights and tools you need to succeed in school leadership. This is the show we wish we had 20 years ago. This show is about you. We're here to help you become the best school leader you can be while still having a life outside of work. In this episode, I interviewed Justin Murphy. Justin is a seasoned journalist who reports on education both in print and online. We talk about how school administrators can build positive relationships with the media, mistakes to avoid when working with the press, and how to figure out the real story when you have conflicting information from different sources. We also get into a couple of productivity hacks that Justin has found useful as a reporter, as well as his approach to staying caught up on email. Enjoy this interview with Justin Murphy. I'm here with Justin Murphy. Justin, thanks for joining me today.
My pleasure.
Can you tell folks a little bit about your background and yourself?
Yeah, I'm the education reporter at the Democrat and Chronicle in Rochester, New York. I grew up around here in the suburb of Penfield, and always was kind of into writing. I went to the University of Chicago for undergraduate, and then I got a master's degree in journalism at Syracuse University, and worked at a small paper out that way, and I've been now at the Democrat and Chronicle for a little over 3 years, and for about half of that time now I've been covering education. I cover the city school district and also the 18 surrounding suburban school districts.
Okay, so in that time that you've been working and covering public education, have you noticed a change in the narrative around public education?
Yeah, I think that there are two main dynamics that get talked about a lot and that might be shifting a little bit. The first one, I would say, is the issue of testing and standards and all of that. I think that it's becoming more widespread and acceptable to question the direction that education is going in now, in terms of the way, in particular, students and teachers are assessed. I think we all kind of, at the foundation, would like to say, well, you know, the schools know what they're doing, and the education department, by extension, I assume, knows what they're doing, and tests are just something that you have to do. I think that's kind of the traditional way to think about it, but as more evidence comes out of the problems that people are having with these sorts of things, I think that more people are coming around to the point of view that actually somebody needs to step in and things need to be changed. The second one that is, I think, maybe particular to Monroe County, where Rochester is, but also could be happening elsewhere, is the dynamic between city and suburban school districts, especially concerning the level of privilege and the kinds of opportunities that kids in both of those places have. We're obviously hopefully at the nadir of a long decline for the city school districts, where a lot of resources, both human and financial, have been drained out to the outlying towns. And I think that was, for a while, was kind of working out just fine for a lot of people. And I think some of the costs of that are starting to catch up when you see what it means that only 9% of black boys in the Rochester School District graduate. It doesn't really matter what town you live in. That's something that is probably going to end up affecting you either in taxes or in some other way. So I think that there has been more momentum in looking at the city and suburban divide, and in particular looking at the city school districts and saying, what support do they need that they're not getting? Is this current situation just, and if not, what can be done about it? I hear that sort of conversation going on a lot more than even 18 months ago.
Well, and even a willingness on the part of people to have the conversation.
Yeah.
Because it seemed like even a few years ago we weren't comfortable talking about the effects of abject poverty, but now it's coming more into the forefront.
Yeah, as you know, here in Monroe County, we have the urban suburban program where city school children can go to the suburban schools, and that if they, the suburban schools get to choose them, and that was kind of stagnant for a long time. There was, let's see, I think 9 participating districts, and then this year was the 50th anniversary, so we saw one district kind of dip its toe in the water, and it was a very tentative and kind of nail-biting process, but they went for it, and it ended up, I think you might know better than I do, I think 5 or 6 districts signed up, and another 2 or 3 said they'll probably get around to it next year. So that was an example of a tipping point that it seems like we might be approaching.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to switch gears a little bit here and talk more kind of in general. So when you're covering stories about education or really anything, and you're presented with conflicting information from different sources, what kind of thought process or what do you do to kind of resolve that and to get toward, I guess, the objective truth?
Yeah, it's a tricky one because, as you know, education can be so contentious in almost any different topic that you talk about with so many different stakeholders. That my best tool, if I can, is to get official, reliable government information. So if I can get some numbers on, for instance, if I'm writing about attendance or if I'm writing about suspension rates, which I have been lately. It's always important to talk to people about why they think kids are getting suspended, what could be done differently, what are the effects of this, all that kind of thing. But at the end of the day, I need to be able to say, this is how many kids are actually sitting out of school. For example, we had a high school here that's going in the city that's going through a lot of changes right now, and the principal is a very engaging guy, and he means very well, and I don't doubt any of that for a second. But I was able to gather data that showed that in the first 3 or 4 months of the school year, more than 1,000 kids had been suspended. So that's something that, once I have that datum, then I can go back and make sure that the rest of my story is based around that. Say, no matter what I think of this guy or what I think of these kids or these teachers who are doing a hard job, the fact is that kids are missing an enormous amount of school, and we need to, concentrate on that. So that's one thing. I'd say the other thing is that once you make your decision, and sometimes it's going to be flawed by nature, you need to be transparent about how you did it. So, for example, a few months ago, I had a story about non-English speaking students with disabilities in Rochester City School District that were being mistreated very badly. They were not getting the services that they needed. And I had a lot of data in that one, but I also had a lot of allegations from parents. They said, my kid went into school, and for instance, the teacher called her stupid. And I go back to the school, and as you can imagine, the teacher says, well, no, I didn't call her stupid. That never happened. And there are a lot of things like that, and I'm not going to get a government file to tell me the truth of that. So what you need to do is I weighed the evidence I had and made a certain decision about what to include and what not to include in those sorts of cases. And then I wrote right in the article, there were times when I wasn't there. I can't say exactly what happened, so we made the best determination we could. But the possibility remains, the fact remains that was my determination to make, and it wasn't necessarily a 100% thing. So I think as long as you tell people that and they recognize the situation you were in as a decision maker, you can blunt a lot of criticism you might come in for before it happens.
Okay. So you've interviewed lots of school administrators over the last few years, and you've probably seen other people do it or have had exposure to that. So what are some of the biggest mistakes that you've seen school and district leaders make when it comes to working with the media?
This, I think, maybe will sound self-serving, but I think the biggest mistake I see is that administrators try to control their messaging too tightly. They try and put a strangle on everything that's coming out, and you only get to hear things through the one district mouthpiece. And if it's something negative, then they're not going to comment. And I certainly understand the reasoning behind that. I can imagine that if I were part of an organization, I would want something similar to that. But the fact is, you see over and over and over again, it just doesn't work. I can say, and this is maybe a personality quirk for me, but there's some districts around here that I have had multiple occasions of them, some kind of negative, or even not negative, but for whatever reason they don't like a story, and they say, well, we're not going to comment, or we're not going to give you information in a timely fashion, and it makes me just want to get it more. It makes me assume that they're hiding something, or that the story's worse than it is, when it's probably not that terrible of a thing in the first place.
But even the whiff of something being covered up or hidden makes you want to look harder.
Yeah, that's right. And I think the best public information officers and superintendents that I deal with are, number one, they're accessible, because if somebody's accessible, and there are some superintendents I know will pick up their phone or their cell phone when I call them, then I'm going to have a better relationship with them, because I'm going to be talking to them more. And, frankly, they trust me, having worked with me before, to be a reasonable person who's not going to, I'm not going to twist their quote into something it's not. And if they put their foot in something, then I'm going to give them an opportunity to explain how it happened. And I guess part of that is in acceptance of the fact that sometimes things might not go exactly the way that you want them to. But if your reaction in the first case is always to put the whole district on lockdown, maybe sometimes it works, but I would say it works less often than it doesn't.
And I would imagine that the people who go out there and are kind of open and honest, and if somebody made a mistake, if they come out and say it, that probably dissipates a little quicker than the trying to chase down something that's been covered up.
Yeah, sure. And that's true. I think on a personal level, for me as a reporter, I think everybody's like this. If I'm talking on the phone with somebody and they say, we made a mistake or something, and we're working to fix it, I am, I'm not going to be inclined to bash them over the head with it. And I think that's also true of the readers, because the last thing that you want to happen, and probably will happen in those situations, is the article day one saying, there's some kind of controversy, and the superintendent wouldn't comment. And then day two or day three, it's, well, more details are pouring out from whatever the situation is. If the superintendent said something in the first place, then everybody would have forgotten about it by day three.
Right.
And it's not the other thing, I guess, is it's not only, I'm not only talking about crisis control, but just if I have kind of innocuous requests or things that I find interesting. I had an experience one time a few years ago. There was a suburban district around here that was putting on the play The Wiz, which is like The Wizard of Oz, but it's kind of Afrocentric. And when it was on Broadway, I think it was all black actors. And this is a suburban district with mostly white kids. So I found out about it. I said, boy, that's interesting. I would be curious to see how you handle that, and is that like a sensitivity thing for the kids, or I don't know, what do you think about that? And they said, no, we're not gonna discuss that. And that was, I think, an opportunity that they missed to have a very interesting story about their district. And maybe not, I think districts always say, well, we want more good news stories. We want stories about the bake sale and the kids who got all the, National Honor Society and everything. But those sometimes aren't very interesting. That's why we don't do them. But it is interesting to show stories like that that it might not be just a complete fluff piece, but it can show, if I talk to these kids, I assume they're going to say, this is really informative for me. This has been, I've learned how to look from somebody else's point of view. I assume that the theater teacher is imparting interesting lessons to them. I assume that would have been a really interesting story if I'd been able to do it, but they said no, we're not talking about that. So I did.
Yeah, so really looking at it instead of from a kind of a damage control kind of, minimizing problems perspective, more of a, use the inquiry from a district perspective as an opportunity to share what's going on and the reasoning behind things.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, for what it's worth, to keep in mind that you're a public official and you're doing the public's work with the public's money. So in a sense, that's your job, is to let people know what's going on in the school.
Well, and you've probably found, as I have too, that the vast majority of people are out there doing the best they can, trying to make
Absolutely.
good decisions,
Yeah.
trying to do things that are right for kids. And I think, sometimes people get nervous about, well, what's this going to look like when
Right.
people go to read about it or whatever.
Right. And to be fair, there are times when somebody could get bit for doing that. I think especially you see that with the TV news. If they've only got 45 seconds of airtime to fill, then you're probably not going to get a very nuanced conversation about the issue. So in that case, as superintendents and administrators move up in their career, it's probably a good idea to be on a working relationship with some of the media in your area, and know who, if you have, maybe you do have a sensitive story, and you know who that, well, I'm going to go to this person, and maybe I'll, if this person calls, I'll figure out how to deal with that.
So what's a good way to do that? What would you suggest in terms of trying to develop relationships? Because a lot of larger districts have their own public relations people who kind of work with the media. What about for an administrator? What would you suggest people do?
Well, I think that the administrator needs to set the tone. That kind of fearful attitude that we were talking about before. I think that's natural in the public relations business, because if it's your job to keep bad news about your district out of the newspaper, and then bad news gets in, then you didn't do your job. So, but I think that an administrator is in a position to set a tone for those people and say, we need to be open and we need to be honest about what we're doing, and that includes sharing things and bad things. I'd say the other thing is being accessible. People sometimes ask, when somebody asks something like this, what's the best way to get your product in the newspaper or your company or your school or whatever it is? The answer in almost every case is to answer your phone.
It seems so simple.
it took me a very short amount of time to know if I'm writing at 4:30 on a deadline and I need a quote from a superintendent about testing or about whatever general issue. I have a list of 3 or 4 people in my head that I know are going to answer their phone when I call them, and I'm going to call them because I'm trying to get home for dinner at 5:30.
Right.
So if I have to go through your person and she says, well, let me see, I'll talk to him, and then I hear back from her and she says, call him at 8 o'clock, I'll say, no, it's okay, because this other superintendent gave me a cell phone and we had a nice conversation for 5 minutes and it was done with.
Right. So accessibility and, and answering when people call.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Any other advice you'd give folks in terms of working with the media?
I guess just overall, I would say not to overthink it. In general, reporters we're just trying to find out what is happening. So whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, just have a conversation like you would with anybody else in your life who's trying to find out what's happening. It's probably not, there's always, I guess, a chance that something gets twisted around, but there's probably a better chance that you come off looking like a reasonable, responsible public servant who's doing the best at his or her appointed task. So I think, like we were saying, sometimes people get all kind of turned around in a bunch about, well, the media with a capital M is calling, how am I going to handle this? Well, just pick up the phone and say hello and see what they have to say. Now, I say that as a reporter, so I assume that there are other people who might have a different opinion of it, but it's, people sometimes think, sometimes I'll call people and they say, well, is this an interview or are we just talking? I said, well, yeah, that's exactly what it is. We're just talking, and I'm interviewing you, so don't worry about it.
Don't worry about it. Now, and that's funny. And I was going to ask that because I feel like, I've been quoted a couple times in the paper, and I feel like each time it happens, I feel a little better.
Yeah.
Like it's almost a repeated exposure thing where, okay, this doesn't go horribly wrong every time.
Have you ever had a bad experience?
I haven't, no.
No.
No. And
I wonder when you talk with other administrators and this topic comes up, are horror stories common, or do you think it's something that people are sort of imagining?
I think it's honestly, I think it's more of what you kind of described before, this nebulous fear that something bad might happen. And that, once I give that information to you, now I've lost control of it.
Right.
And I think at least for me, that when I put myself in those shoes, that's what I think of. That oh God, I just said that. Is that gonna how can that be taken? Is it gonna? And I think after doing that a couple of times and realizing that no, what I said showed up like I meant it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it is. I think it's a comfort thing probably that comes with experience and with developing relationships, like you said, with
Sure.
folks in the media.
Sure, because you and I have talked enough times that you essentially know what's going to happen when I call you. But if somebody else calls you, then you might be a little farther back on that timeline.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. I'm gonna change it up here again on you if I can. How about any personal productivity things that you do or that you've seen people do that might be helpful to our folks out there with busy lives trying to get home at a reasonable hour?
Yeah, being a reporter is good for that. When I started, I thought it would be, I'd be like an artist who was crafting every word that went out and with finely honed metaphors and whatever. And actually, I found that the writing is, like 10% of the job. Maybe it's a lot more information gathering, interviewing, reading, researching, whatever. Um, so when the writing comes along, there's it's secondary. It's just something that you kind of have to knock out, and it gets the idea of writer's block out of your head, because if I have writer's block, well, then I'm just going to need to write anyway. I don't have the luxury of that, and if that means that I don't do my best work, then I need to get it out anyway, because we're putting things up online and in the newspaper. So I would say, stepping back from a task that you're doing and not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In one way, when I get stuck in and I need to write something up, and for writing in particular, what I'll often do is, if I can't think, the lead is always the hardest, the first sentence, because you want to kind of introduce the whole thing, and sometimes you're not sure where it's going exactly. So what I'll do is I'll start with something that I know. So, for instance, if I have a quote that I know I'm going to use, or if I have one point that I know I'm going to make somewhere in the story, I can write that, and I know that whenever I get done with the whole thing, that'll be in there somewhere.
And so then you pick a spot and then write around it.
Yeah, so then maybe from there, well, I know the thing that needs to lead into this, so let me do that. And you kind of, like doing a puzzle, you kind of fill it in piece by piece, and doing the easy parts first, and you end up figuring out that, well, essentially it was all more or less easy. I just didn't know how to do it. And then you can cut and paste and move things around. So, I think administrators probably do some writing, so that might be pertinent like that. But I think more broadly, you could say, if you've got a large, complicated job, and I don't even know what administrators do, so I couldn't give an example, but if you have a multifaceted thing, then just pick the facet that jumps out at you that you can do right now that's easy, and that'll probably give you, once you've done that, it'll give you not only some momentum, but some insight into the best way to do the next thing.
That's great. That's great advice.
Yeah.
And one more practical one here. How do you must get a ton of email.
Yeah.
Any like epiphanies on how to stay caught up or ahead or anything?
Well, it helps that I'm kind of neurotic about getting rid of things. So sometimes you see people with like 9,000 emails in their inbox because they don't use their delete key. I use my delete key all the time. And actually a couple months I got down to inbox 0, which I was extremely proud of, and I immediately left work and took the rest of the day off.
Very nice. Did you take a screenshot of it?
Yeah, I sure did. I tweeted it. You can probably find it. But I would say sometimes I have an email around in my folder that I'm keeping because it includes a piece of information that I'm going to need at some point. And so what I'll do is I'll just copy and paste whatever that is, or download the attachment and save it into some folder where I have all my other stuff, and then I don't need the email anymore.
Right.
So I think that sometimes there's like a sense of foreboding, like, oh, this email, like, I don't know what it is, but I know it's vaguely important and I'm going to need to deal with it at some point, so let me just leave it there until it's 4 months old. But if it's simple advice, but if you try and attack stuff as you can, and if, for email in particular, at all costs, get it out of your email box. Like, it can go in a folder on your desktop. You can find it there. You can print it out. You can call somebody and, get the ball rolling somewhere, but leaving it hanging around in there is probably not going to do any good.
I could not agree more. And any books to recommend? Anything you're reading these days that you found pretty cool that you'd like to share?
Books to recommend. The most recent education book I read was by a guy named Ron Suskind, and it's called A Hope in the Unseen. And it's kind of an old book, actually. He wrote it in 1998. He followed a kid from the Washington, D.C. school district through his, I think, junior and senior year of high school, and then this kid ended up going to Brown, and he followed him. He got incredible access. This, by the way, this is a wonderful example of what we were talking about before about relinquishing control. They let this reporter in. He sat in every class. He talked to the kids' teachers, and they told him all of his grades. I mean, all these things that, frankly, I wouldn't recommend doing in a normal case, but he gained their trust, and he wrote a portrait of his time in this school that was, not unstintingly generous in how it described the school, but it was accurate. It was truthful, and it described what kids are going through. And he did that all the way up through his freshman year at Brown. And, the same thing with the kid. The kid didn't necessarily come out looking like a hero. He was kind of a jerk sometimes, and he screwed off sometimes when he shouldn't have. But yeah, it was really a remarkable. I mean, for me, a lesson as a journalist, the way the amount of time and energy that he put into this project. But it's really those kind of longitudinal studies. I think when you shrink your sights down a little bit, that you can get a lot of insight into the bigger system.
Very cool. Justin Murphy, education reporter, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today.
You're welcome. I enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening to the School Leadership Show, a podcast for aspiring and practicing school leaders by school leaders. Send your comments, questions, and show ideas to mike@schoolleadershipshow.com. Consider rating the podcast in iTunes and leaving a comment. And please pass the show along to your colleagues.